The universe was old. Older than most species could comprehend. Older than the stars that burned at the edges of known space. Older than the great galactic empire itself, a civilization so vast, so powerful, so deeply rooted in the fabric of interstellar history that most species simply accepted one truth without question. Nothing could challenge the empire. Nothing ever had. Nothing ever would. That was the belief. That was the gospel preached on 1,000 worlds, broadcast across 1,000,000 frequencies, carved into the stone walls of imperial senate chambers on the capital planet of Valethur Prime. The Empire was eternal. The Empire was supreme. The Empire was the beginning and the end of all things that mattered in the known galaxy. And for 3,000 years, they had been right. 3,000 years of absolute dominance. 3,000 years of expansion, conquest, and control. The Galactic Empire, under the iron rule of Emperor Drakenvel III, commanded over 400 star systems. They had fleets numbering in the tens of thousands, warships the size of small moons, armed with weapons capable of cracking a planet's crust from orbit. They had standing armies of over 2 billion soldiers. They had technology so advanced that lesser civilizations wept when they first saw it, falling to their knees in surrender before a single shot was fired. The Empire did not ask for loyalty. It took it. And every species in the known galaxy had learned that lesson. The Vorkai, the Selenith, the Drun Collective, the Marith Confederation, all of them had bowed. All of them had bent their knees, offered their resources, their labor, their worlds, and their futures to the Empire in exchange for one simple thing: the right to continue existing. That was the deal. That was always the deal. So when the signal came from the far edge of the Outer Rim, from a region of space so distant and so unexplored that most imperial star charts simply marked it with a single word: unknown. Nobody in the Empire panicked. Nobody worried. They were curious, yes, mildly. The way you might be curious about a strange insect you had never seen before, interested enough to look, but not concerned enough to step back. The signal had been detected by an Imperial deep space listening station called Outpost Corin 7, a small installation staffed by 42 soldiers and a crew of communication specialists. It floated at the very edge of mapped space, its long-range antenna arrays pointed outward into the dark like the ears of something waiting. On the morning of what the Empire called the third cycle of the year 3412, a young communications officer named Sela Vorn picked up the signal. She almost missed it. It was buried deep in background radiation, compressed into a narrow band frequency that the Empire's standard equipment wasn't even designed to fully process. If Sela had been less thorough, if she had been the kind of person who skimmed reports and moved on, she would have flagged it as interference and deleted it. But Sela was not that kind of person. She was 26 years old, small in build, with sharp gray eyes and a habit of triple-checking everything. She had grown up on the imperial colony world of Thessa Minor, the daughter of a dockworker and a school teacher, and she had earned her post at Outpost Corin, 7 through 7 years of hard study and harder work. She was not brilliant in the way that made other people feel small. She was brilliant in the quiet way, the kind of brilliant that noticed things others walked right past. She noticed the signal. She ran it through 3 different analysis filters. She boosted the frequency. She stripped away the background noise layer by layer until what remained was clean and clear and unmistakable. It was a transmission. A structured, deliberate, mathematically encoded transmission. Coming from deep within the unknown region. Sela sat very still for a long moment, staring at her screen. Then she picked up her comm unit and called her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Breck Osar, a heavy-set Vorkai male with forearms and a deep, rumbling voice that could shake the walls of a small room. "Sir," she said, "I think you need to come look at this." Breck Osar arrived in the communications bay within 3 minutes. He stood behind Sela's station, leaning forward on 2 of his forearms, and studied the signal readout on her screen. His large amber eyes moved slowly across the data. His jaw tightened. Then he was quiet for a very long time. "Run it again," he said finally. She ran it again. The signal was still there. Still structured. Still deliberate. Still coming from the dark. "Source location?" Breck asked. "Deep in the unknown region, sir," Sela said. "At least 40 light-years past our last mapped coordinates." Whatever is sending this, it's far out there. Duration. The signal has been transmitting for at least 6 hours before I caught it, she said. Could be longer. I only have a 6-hour window from my last full-spectrum scan. Breck straightened up slowly. He was quiet again. Then he looked at the other 2 crew members in the room. Both of them now very still, very focused, watching him with wide eyes. Nobody says a word about this to anyone, he said quietly. Not until I've made contact with Fleet Command. Understood. They all nodded. Breck walked to his own station and opened a secure channel directly to Imperial Fleet Command headquarters on Vaelther Prime. He filed a priority report. He attached the full signal data. He marked the transmission as Tier 2 unusual, not alarming, not urgent, but worth noting. Worth looking at. Fleet Command received the report. They looked at it. They assigned it to a junior analyst team. The junior analyst team reviewed the data, ran their own filters, and came back with a simple conclusion 2 days later. Unknown origin. Possibly natural. Monitoring recommended. And that was that. The signal continued broadcasting from the dark of the unknown region. And for the next 3 weeks, nobody in the Galactic Empire gave it very much thought at all. That was the first mistake. 3 weeks after Sela Vorn filed her report, a young Imperial Admiral named Kane Verath sat in a briefing room on the flagship of the 7th Imperial Fleet, a massive warship called the Dominion's Edge, and listened to his intelligence officer read a routine status update. He was 34 years old, tall and lean, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of calm, steady eyes that made junior officers feel both reassured and slightly nervous at the same time. He had risen through the ranks faster than almost anyone in recent Imperial history, not because of family connections or political favor, but because he was very, very good at his job. He was also, in the quiet opinion of the people who worked closest to him, one of the few officers in the Imperial fleet who truly thought before he acted. In a military culture that rewarded aggression and decisiveness above almost everything else, that quality was sometimes seen as a weakness. Kane did not care what it was seen as. He kept thinking anyway. His intelligence officer, a sharp-featured woman named Lieutenant Pira Das, was midway through her status report when she mentioned the signal from Outpost Corin, 7 almost as an afterthought, a brief footnote at the end of a long list of routine updates. The anomalous signal from the unknown region remains active, Pira said. Fleet Command assessment remains unchanged, unknown origin, possibly natural. Monitoring is ongoing. Kane held up one hand. Pira stopped. The signal is still active, he said. Yes, sir. For how long now? Pira checked her data pad. 23 days, sir. Continuously. Kane was quiet. He looked at the table in front of him for a moment. Then, he looked back up. A naturally occurring signal that broadcasts continuously on a structured mathematical frequency for 23 days, he said. Yes, sir. Does that sound natural to you, Lieutenant? Pira paused for just a moment. No, sir, she admitted. It doesn't. Pull the full signal data for me, Kane said. Every bit of it. And get me the original report from Outpost Corin 7. Yes, sir. The briefing ended. The other officers filed out. Kane sat alone in the room for a while, looking at nothing in particular, thinking. Something in the back of his mind, some quiet, careful, watchful part of him, was awake in a way it hadn't been in a long time.
He didn't know why yet.
But he had learned long ago to pay attention when that part of him woke up. The full signal data arrived on Kane's desk within the hour. He spent the rest of that day and most of the night studying it. He brought in his best signals analyst, a quiet, meticulous man named Specialist Joran Tai, who worked through the data alongside him without complaint, running decode after decode, stripping and rebuilding the frequency layers with the kind of patient precision that most people found boring and Kane found deeply satisfying. By the early hours of the morning, they had something. Not everything. Not a full translation. But something. The signal was not random. It was not natural interference. It was a structured, repeating transmission composed of mathematical sequences, prime numbers, geometric ratios, dimensional constants, the kind of foundational language that any species capable of advanced physics would recognize, regardless of what words they spoke or what sounds they made. It was a greeting. Or, more precisely, it was an announcement. And buried at the very core of it, beneath the mathematical framework, Beneath the layers of encoded structure was a single piece of data that made Specialist Joran Tai put down his tools and sit back in his chair and stare at the ceiling for a very long moment. Coordinates. Specific, precise coordinates. Not from the signal's origin point. Different coordinates. Closer. Much closer. The coordinates pointed to a location just 11 light-years beyond the edge of Imperial mapped space. Sir, Joran said slowly, I think whatever is sending this signal isn't just saying hello. Kane looked at the coordinates on the screen. No, he said quietly. It's telling us where to look. He sat back. He rubbed his jaw slowly. He thought. Then he reached for his comm unit and opened a direct channel to Fleet Command. This time, he did not file a Tier 2 report. He filed a Tier 1. And he requested immediate authorization to take 3 ships into the unknown region to investigate. Fleet Command received his request. The senior admiral on duty, a veteran called High Admiral Marin Solis, a woman who had served the Empire for 40 years and had seen enough in those 40 years to make her deeply skeptical of anything she couldn't immediately explain, reviewed Kane's report personally. She approved the mission within 6 hours. Take 3 ships, she told him over the comm channel. Scout only. Do not engage anything you find. Observe, record, and report back immediately. Understood, ma'am, Kane said. And Verath, she added, her voice dropping just slightly. Be careful. It was such a simple thing to say.
Such a standard thing.
Such an ordinary military caution. And yet something in the way she said it, the slight pause before the words, the almost imperceptible shift in her tone, made Kane feel, for just a brief moment, the tiniest edge of something cold along the back of his neck. Yes, ma'am, he said. I will. He closed the channel. He stood up from his desk, walked to the wide viewport of his quarters, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there in the dark, beyond the edge of everything the Empire had mapped and measured and claimed, something was broadcasting a signal. Something was leaving coordinates. Something was pointing at a location in space and saying, in the universal language of mathematics, come here. Look at this. We want you to see. Kane stared at the stars for a long time. Then he turned away, pulled on his uniform jacket, and went to prepare his ships. 3 ships left the Dominion's edge the following morning. The Sentinel, a mid-range Imperial scout cruiser, fast, lightly armored, equipped with the best long-range sensor arrays in the 7th Fleet. The Iron Reach, a slightly heavier patrol vessel with enhanced shielding and a full combat crew, brought along not because Kane expected a fight, but because he had spent enough years in the Imperial fleet to know that the difference between a scouting mission and a combat situation was sometimes measured in seconds. And the Narrow Path, a small but highly capable signals intelligence ship, crewed almost entirely by analysts and specialists, because whatever they found out there, Kane wanted to understand it, not just see it. He traveled aboard the Sentinel, standing at the forward observation bridge as the 3 ships crossed the edge of Imperial map space and pushed out into the dark. The unknown region lived up to its name. It was not dramatic in the way that danger usually announced itself. There were no sudden warning lights, no alarms, no visible signs of anything threatening. The stars continued in their slow, ancient patterns. The void continued being the void. Space continued being exactly what it always was, cold, vast, and completely indifferent to the small ships moving through it. But something felt different. Kane couldn't explain it precisely. He was not a superstitious man. He did not believe in feelings over data. But standing at the forward bridge of the Sentinel, watching the unknown region open up around him on all sides through the wide viewport panels, he felt the same quiet alertness that he had felt in that briefing room 3 days ago. Stronger now, more awake. The sensor arrays were working overtime. Every 3 hours, Kane's sensor chief, a precise, no-nonsense woman named Chief Petty Officer Dara Wenz, delivered a full readout of everything the Sentinel's long-range systems were picking up. Radiation levels, gravitational readings, electromagnetic fields, background thermal data, everything. For the first 30 hours of travel, the readouts were almost completely clean. Almost. On the 3rd readout, Chief Wenz noted a faint energy signature approximately 6 light hours ahead of their current position. It was subtle enough that automated systems had flagged it only as a low-priority anomaly. But Kane was reviewing every readout personally, and he caught it. What is that? He asked, pointing to the energy signature on the data screen. Dara leaned over and studied it. Low intensity. Diffuse spread. She frowned slightly, which for Dara was the equivalent of anyone else throwing their hands up and saying they had absolutely no idea. Sir, it doesn't match any natural phenomenon in our catalog. And it doesn't match any artificial energy signature on record either. Something new, then, Kane said. Something new, she confirmed. Head toward it, Kane told the helm officer. Reduce speed to 1/4. They moved toward the energy signature slowly, carefully, with all sensor arrays running at maximum sensitivity. 3 hours later, they found the coordinates. The coordinates from the signal. And at those coordinates, they found something that made every person on the bridge of a Sentinel stop whatever they were doing and simply stare. It was a structure. Floating in open space, far from any star, far from any planet, suspended in the dark as if it had always been there and always would be, a structure so large that it took the Sentinel's computer several full seconds to process its dimensions and display them on the readout screen. Kane looked at the numbers. He looked at them again. Is this right? He asked quietly. Chief, Wenz was already triple-checking. Yes, sir, she said, and her voice was very steady, but very quiet. Those numbers are correct. The structure was 11 kilometers tall, 7 kilometers wide. It appeared to be made of a material the ship's sensors couldn't fully classify, dense, dark, absorbing most of the light that fell on it, but with a faint inner luminescence that pulsed in long, slow intervals, like breathing, like a heartbeat, and carved or built or somehow placed into its surface were markings. Enormous markings. Lines and curves and angles that repeated across the surface in patterns that made Joran Tai, who had transferred over from the narrow path for the approach, grip the edge of the sensor station with both hands and lean forward with an expression of pure, stunned fascination. Those are the same mathematical sequences, he breathed. From the signal. They're there written on it. Nobody said anything for a very long moment. The structure pulsed.
In, out,
Slow.
steady.
Like breathing. Sir, said Pira Das from the communications station, I'm picking up a new transmission. Short range. Directional. It's coming from the structure, and it's aimed directly at us. Kane turned. Put it on screen. The transmission came through. It was not mathematical this time. It was voice. A voice that the translation system struggled with for exactly 4 seconds, just 4 seconds, before it found a match, searched through its database of over 3,000 recorded alien languages, and produced a translation that appeared in clean text at the bottom of the screen. The voice said, You came. Good. We were beginning to wonder if you would. The bridge was completely silent. Kane looked at the text on screen. Then he looked at the structure through the viewport. Enormous, pulsing, dark, ancient, waiting. Then he walked forward 2 steps, stood at the communications panel, and pressed the transmit key. This is Admiral Kane Verath of the 7th Imperial Fleet, he said, keeping his voice level. You have our attention. Who are you? A pause. Then the structure pulsed once, brighter than before, a deep, slow bloom of inner light, and the voice came back. We are the ones who came before your empire existed. We are the ones who watched you grow. We are the ones who needed to know before we made contact whether you were the kind of civilization that listens or only the kind that takes. Another pause. You sent 3 ships. Small. Cautious.
Careful.
That is encouraging. Kane's jaw tightened slightly. He pressed transmit again. What do you want? The structure pulsed again. We want to talk to you about what is coming, the voice said. Because something is coming, Admiral. Something your empire has never seen. Something your empire, in its current state, cannot stop. A long pause. And we thought you deserved the chance to know about it before it arrives. Kane stood very still. Behind him, he could feel the entire bridge crew holding their collective breath. He could feel the weight of it, the massive, quiet, breathless weight of a moment that every person on that ship somehow already knew was going to change everything. He pressed transmit one more time.
Tell me, he said.
The entity or entities, because the voice sometimes shifted in subtle ways that suggested more than one mind behind it, called themselves the Ethon. They did not explain where they had come from in terms Kane's translation system could fully render. But from what he could piece together over the next several hours of careful, patient conversation, the Ethon were old. Incomprehensibly old. They had existed in the galaxy for a period of time that made the 3,000-year history of the Galactic Empire look like an afternoon. They did not have ships, or at least not ships in any sense that Kane would recognize. The structure in front of him was not a ship. It was something more like a concentrated presence. A fixed point. A place where they chose to exist in a form that other species could perceive and interact with. They had been watching the galaxy for a very, very long time. They had watched empires rise. They had watched empires fall. They had watched species burn themselves out and species reach up into the stars, and both kinds had one thing in common in the end. The moment they believed they were the most powerful thing in the universe was usually the moment they stopped paying attention to the things that were actually more powerful than them. The Galactic Empire, the Ethon explained, was currently living in that moment. 3,000 years of unchallenged dominance had made them certain of their supremacy. That certainty was going to cost them, because on the far side of the unknown region, beyond the signal, beyond the structure, in the deep, unexplored dark of space that not even the Ethon had fully mapped, something was moving. Something that the Ethon had first detected 60 years ago as a distant tremor in the fabric of interstellar space. Something that had been growing steadily, moving steadily, coming steadily closer with each passing decade in a straight, unwavering line that pointed directly at the heart of the Galactic Empire. What is it?
Kane asked.
He was sitting in his command chair now, elbows on his knees, leaning forward, completely focused. We do not know its name, the Ethon said. We do not believe it has one in the way you use names. It is not a species in the traditional sense.
It is not a fleet or an army.
It is a force, a collective, a thing that moves through space, consuming what it finds and becoming stronger with each consumption. How large is it? When we first detected it 60 years ago, it occupied a region of space approximately the size of your empire's core territories. Kane felt something very cold settle in his chest. And now it occupies a region of space 4 times that size. The cold thing in Kane's chest spread outward. How long until it reaches imperial space, he asked. At its current rate of movement and growth, the Ethon said, approximately 40 years. 40 years. Kane sat back slowly. 40 years sounded like a long time. In human terms, in the terms of a single life, a single career, a single generation, 40 years was an entire lifetime. Children born today would be middle-aged adults when the thing arrived. But in military terms, in terms of building, training, developing, preparing a civilization to face something it had never faced before, 40 years was nothing. 40 years was barely enough time. Barely. If they started now, if they started immediately, if they were very, very serious about it. Why are you telling us this?
Kane asked.
A long pause from the Ethon. Because you are here, they said finally. Because you sent careful ships instead of warships. Because you listened instead of fired. And because. The structure pulsed, slow and deep, and something in the quality of the voice shifted when it continued. Because there is a species on the very edge of your empire's territory. A newly discovered world. Small. Primitive by your standards. They have barely reached the early stages of space exploration. Your empire has not yet decided what to do with them. Kane frowned slightly. What species? They call themselves humans, the Ethon said. And Admiral, before you decide what to do with them, we think you should go and look at them very carefully. Kane stared at the screen. Because we have been watching them, the Ethon continued, and they are not what they appear to be. The planet was called Earth. It was small by galactic standards, a modest rocky world orbiting a yellow dwarf star in a system that most imperial star maps marked as utterly unremarkable. 1 star. 8 planets. A thin, breathing atmosphere on the 3rd planet from the star. A single large moon. Abundant liquid water. Dense with life. The Empire had known about Earth for approximately 12 years. It had been flagged during a routine deep-range survey, detected, cataloged, and then essentially forgotten about, filed under a category the imperial bureaucracy had a very specific and very dismissive name for: pre-integration worlds. Pre-integration worlds were planets that had achieved some degree of technological development, but had not yet reached a level that made them immediately useful to the Empire. They were typically left alone, not out of kindness, but out of simple economics. The cost of early contact, early administration, early integration of a pre-space civilization was high. The Empire preferred to wait until a species had developed at least basic faster-than-light travel on their own, which meant they were ready for integration without requiring the Empire to hold their hand through the entire process. Earth was not there yet. Earth's most advanced spacecraft could barely manage their own solar system. Their fastest ships traveled at a small fraction of what the Empire considered minimum viable speed. They had no weapon systems worth noting in the official assessment reports. No energy technology that the Empire's most junior engineers couldn't replicate in an afternoon. The official Empire assessment of humanity, filed 12 years ago, had concluded with a single, blunt sentence. Species presents no threat. Integration recommended when technological threshold is met, estimated in approximately 2 to 300 years. 2 to 300 years. That was what the Empire thought of humans. A species that would need 2 to 3 centuries more of development before they were even worth formally speaking to. Cain Verath arrived in Earth's solar system with all 3 ships running on passive sensor mode, no active transmissions, no energy signatures that Earth's primitive detection systems would be able to pick up. He had been authorized to conduct observation only. No contact. No interference. He stood at the viewport of the Sentinel and looked at the planet from a distance of approximately 800,000 kilometers, roughly twice the distance between Earth and its moon, and he studied it. It was, he had to admit, a beautiful world. The blue of the oceans was extraordinary, a deep, rich, vivid blue that seemed almost impossibly saturated from this distance. The white swirl of clouds over the continents. The brown and green of the land masses. The white ice at the poles. Beautiful.
Small.
Seemingly harmless. But the Ethon had told him to look carefully. So he looked carefully. Chief Winds had the sensor arrays running at full passive sensitivity, gathering everything, recording everything, analyzing everything the planet and its civilization were broadcasting and emitting without any active probing on their part. And what the sensors gathered over the following 48 hours of silent observation was, when Cain sat down to review it all in full, quietly remarkable. The humans were, by any objective technical measure, far behind the Empire. That part of the original assessment was entirely accurate. But there was something else in the data. Something that didn't show up in the technical specs or the ship measurements or the weapons assessments. It was in the pattern of it, the behavior of it, the sheer relentless, unstoppable, borderline insane pace of it. In the 12 years since the Empire had first catalogued Earth, the humans had launched 47 independent space exploration missions. 47. In 12 years. In a civilization that was still using chemical rockets, burning controlled explosions beneath their ships to push themselves off the surface of their planet, they had managed to put probes around almost every major body in their solar system, land robotic explorers on 3 different worlds, build and maintain an orbital station that had been continuously occupied for over 20 years, and were currently in the advanced planning stages of sending living crew members to the surface of their neighboring planet. On chemical rockets, with slide rule physics and fusion reactor technology that the Empire had passed through about 600 years ago. They never stop, Specialist Joran Tai said quietly, sitting beside Cain in the analysis room, looking at the accumulated data. Look at this. They've had disasters. Major disasters. Multiple failed missions, crew deaths, catastrophic equipment failures. And every single time they stop for a period of grief and review, they fix whatever failed, and then they go again. Cain was reading the same data. They grieve, and then they go again, he said. Every time, Joran confirmed. Cain turned to another section of the report, the one covering human conflicts. Because the humans were, the censors confirmed, not a peaceful species. Not at all. They argued with each other constantly. They competed with each other fiercely. Different groups of humans, separated by geography and history and language and belief, had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. But something about the nature of those conflicts caught Cain's attention. The humans fought each other endlessly. And in fighting each other, they had developed, out of sheer, brutal, relentless conflict-driven necessity, military technology, tactical doctrine, strategic thinking, and operational capability that was evolving at a rate that made Cain's eyebrows rise very slowly when he processed the century-by-century progression chart. In 100 years, humans had gone from fighting each other with projectile weapons fired by controlled chemical explosions to developing aircraft, armored ground vehicles, radio communications, primitive rockets, nuclear weapons, weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single detonation, and then, recognizing the existential terror of those weapons, building the diplomatic and military frameworks to prevent their use while simultaneously developing faster and more sophisticated. Everything else. In 100 years, 100 years. The Empire had taken 800 years to cover the same ground, and the Empire had started with a base of technology that was already more advanced than anything humanity currently possessed. "Run me the progression model," Kane said. Joran hesitated. "Sir, I already ran it 3 times because I thought the first 2 were errors." And Joran pulled up the screen. If humans continue their current rate of technological development, accounting for the variations in their historical progression, they will reach basic faster-than-light travel capability in approximately 70 to 90 years. Kane stared at the screen. "If they are properly motivated," Joran added quietly, "and given access to foundational theoretical data they're currently missing, that estimate drops considerably, possibly to 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years, Kane repeated. "Yes, sir." Kane sat back.
He thought about the Ethon.
He thought about the thing moving through deep space toward the Empire.
He thought about 40 years.
"There's something else,"
Joran said.
He pulled up another dataset. Their biology. Kane looked at the biological assessment. Humans were, by the standards of most spacefaring species in the galaxy, a physical anomaly. Most intelligent species had evolved in relatively stable, low-threat environments. Over time, as they developed civilization and technology, their physical capabilities had become less important, their bodies growing softer, slower, more dependent on technology to survive. Humans had not done this. Humans had evolved, were still evolving, in a planetary environment that, by the cold, clinical assessment of the sensor data and the biological models the narrow path science team had constructed from remote observation, could only be described in one way: terrifying. The planet's surface hosted thousands of species that actively preyed on or were poisonous to humans. The atmospheric chemistry created powerful weather events capable of destroying human structures. The geological activity of the planet regularly produced earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and other events that could wipe out entire human settlements. The star their planet orbited periodically bathed the surface in radiation bursts that damaged human cellular structure over time. And yet humans had not only survived all of this, they had thrived. Not by becoming invulnerable, they were not invulnerable, not even close, but by becoming adaptable. By learning, by building, by developing the extraordinary ability to take almost any environment, no matter how hostile, no matter how punishing, no matter how completely unsuited to their survival, and find a way, sometimes elegant, sometimes brutal, always relentless, to make it work anyway. Their pain tolerance was, by galactic biological averages, extremely high. Their physical endurance was, by galactic biological averages, extraordinary. Their recovery rate from injury was, by galactic biological averages, exceptional. And their psychological capacity to function under prolonged, extreme stress, to keep making rational decisions, to keep fighting, to keep moving, to keep pushing, while experiencing levels of fear, pain, and exhaustion that would incapacitate most other known species. That was off the charts. Completely off the charts. "Sir," Chief Wen said from across the analysis room, "there's one more thing I think you should look at." She brought up a data screen showing radio transmission samples, the humans' own communications, their broadcasts, their art, their news, their stories. "I had the translation team work through a sample set," Wen said. "Stories.
History.
Cultural output. I thought it might help round out the picture." Kane looked at the screen. The translation team had compiled a summary. Humans told stories, vast quantities of stories, and those stories revealed a great deal about what a species valued, what it feared, what it aspired to. Human stories were full of war, but they were also full of something else. Something that appeared again and again, in culture after culture, in century after century, regardless of geography or language or religion or politics. Stories about impossible odds. Stories about the last stand, the desperate defense. The moment when everything was lost, when there was nothing left, when every rational calculation said stop, give up, it's over. And the human protagonist looked at those odds and said no. Not no because they had a plan. Not no because they had an advantage. Not no because some outside force came to save them.
Just no.
Because they were human. Because they didn't stop. Kane read the summary for a long time. Then he looked up at Chief Wenz. Get me a secure channel to High Admiral Solis, he said. And flag it Priority 1. Yes, sir.
She paused.
What should I tell her it's regarding? Kane looked back at the blue planet on his viewport screen. Tell her, he said slowly, that I've found the answer to our problem, but that she's not going to believe me when I explain it. High Admiral Marin Solis had not become the most senior military officer in the Galactic Empire by being easily surprised. She had served for 40 years. She had fought in 3 major fleet engagements and suppressed 12 separate colonial uprisings. She had watched the Selenith massacre, where an entire Imperial fleet had been ambushed and destroyed in a single afternoon, and then organized and led the retaliatory campaign that had reduced the attacking force to debris within a week. She had negotiated the surrender of the Drun Collective, a civilization that had resisted Imperial expansion for 60 years, in a single 6-hour meeting. She had seen things, many things, and she thought, not arrogantly but with a quiet confidence of long experience, that there were very few things left that could genuinely surprise her. Kane Veratha's full report surprised her. She read it 3 times in the privacy of her office aboard Fleet Headquarters Station, with the door sealed and the communication line closed, and a cup of cold tea forgotten on her desk because she kept forgetting to drink it. Then she sat for a while in silence, looking out the wide viewport at the stars of the Imperial core, and she thought. Then she picked up her secure comm line and contacted Emperor Draken Bell III directly. This was not something she did casually. She had spoken directly to the Emperor fewer than 30 times in 40 years of service, and most of those conversations had been ceremonial or administrative. The Emperor, in her professional assessment, was not a stupid man, but he was a man who had grown up inside the certainty of Imperial supremacy the way a fish grows up inside water, so completely surrounded by it, so entirely shaped by it, that he sometimes seemed genuinely unable to conceive of a world in which that supremacy was not absolute. She was going to have to make him conceive of it. She requested an emergency session of the Imperial High Council, the inner circle of the Empire's government, consisting of the Emperor, his 6 senior advisors, the heads of the 4 major Imperial military branches, and the Director of Imperial Intelligence. It was granted within 12 hours. The session was held in the Imperial Council chamber on Vaelthor Prime, a room that had, over 3,000 years, hosted exactly the kinds of conversations that determined the fates of entire civilizations. The walls were dark stone. The table was enormous and oval, made of a single piece of ancient carved material that had stood in this room for over 1,000 years. The ceiling was high and vaulted, and the Imperial seal, a star surrounded by the interlocked rings that symbolized the Empire's control over its subject worlds, was set into the floor in luminescent stone. Emperor Draken Bell III sat at the head of the table. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with the kind of face that had been carefully arranged over decades into a mask of calm authority. He was wearing his formal imperial robes, deep crimson and black, and he radiated, as he always did, the settled certainty of a man who had never in his life had serious reason to doubt that things would ultimately go his way. High Admiral Solis stood at the foot of the table. She delivered the briefing personally, clearly, and without softening any of it. The signal.
The Ethon.
The thing moving through deep space. The 40 years. The humans. She put it all on the table, in plain language, with a full data package from Kane's report displayed on the chamber's holographic screens for every person in the room to see. When she finished, the room was silent. Then it exploded. Not literally, but the conversation that erupted around that ancient table in the next 60 seconds was the closest thing to chaos that the Imperial High Council had experienced in living memory. Multiple senior advisors began speaking at once, some in disbelief, some in denial, some in genuine alarm. The Director of Imperial Intelligence, a coldly precise man named Heron Vask, immediately began questioning the reliability of the Ethon contact. The head of the Imperial Army, General Oren Das, demanded to know why Fleet Command had authorized an unsanctioned first contact situation with an unknown entity. 3 of the 6 senior advisors were already crafting political arguments before the briefing had even fully sunk in. Emperor Draken Bell III held up one hand. The room went quiet. A threat, he said calmly. From the unknown region. 40 years away. He looked at Solace. And you believe this Ethon entity is credible? The supporting data is credible, Your Imperial Majesty, Solace said. The energy signatures, the trajectory modeling, the physical evidence of the structure itself. Admiral Veyrath's team documented everything. The Ethon's existence is confirmed. The threat vector is confirmed. And their solution, the Emperor said, is for us to accelerate the integration of a primitive pre-space species. He paused, as if tasting something unusual. Humans. Not just integrate, Your Imperial Majesty, Solace said. Partner. The Ethon's recommendation, and Admiral Veyrath's analysis supports it, is that we approach humanity not as a subject species, but as a military ally. That we share technology. That we accelerate their development. That we give them the tools they need to reach our level in years rather than centuries. The silence that followed the statement was a different kind of silence from the one before. It was not the silence of chaos paused. It was the silence of people genuinely trying to process something that contradicted everything they had always assumed to be true. Why them? Asked Lord Advisor Pen Karath, the most senior of the Emperor's civilian advisors, a sharp, pragmatic man who was one of the 3 people in the room whose opinion the Emperor actually valued. Of all the species in or near the Empire, the Vorkai, the Selenith, any of them, why does this Ethon entity specifically point to a primitive pre-space civilization on the edge of the Outer Rim? Solace pulled up Kane's biological and psychological assessment on the holographic screen. Look at the data, she said simply. The room looked at the data. The pain tolerance, the endurance, the stress performance, the adaptation rate, the technological development curve, the psychological profiles, the historical pattern of refusing impossible odds. Lord Advisor Karath studied the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Solace. This is real data, not theoretical modeling. Entirely observational, Solace confirmed. Direct sensor readings from Admiral Veyrath's scout team. 12 years of baseline data from our original survey plus 48 hours of detailed, close-range, passive observation. Karath looked at the screen again. Mother of stars, he said quietly. Emperor Draken was also looking at the screen. His expression had not changed. His face remained arranged in its usual mask of calm authority. But something behind his eyes had shifted very slightly, almost imperceptibly, in the way that very powerful people's eyes sometimes shift when they encounter information that genuinely matters. If we give them our technology, he said slowly, accelerate their development. What is the risk of that? What is to prevent a species with these capabilities, once developed, from becoming a threat to the Empire itself? It was the right question. It was exactly the right question. And Marin Solace, who had spent the past 3 days preparing for this meeting with a thoroughness that had defined her entire career, had the answer ready. Nothing, she said. The room went very still. There is nothing that guarantees humanity won't eventually be a challenge to the Empire, Solace continued. That is a real risk. I won't pretend it isn't. But I will tell you this, Your Imperial Majesty. She looked directly at the Emperor. If the threat in the unknown region is real, and I believe it is, then in 40 years, without the most capable fighting force we can possibly assemble, the Empire as it currently exists will not be here to worry about it. The Emperor held her gaze for a long moment. And Admiral Veyrath, he said. He believes this. He recommends this. He does. And you trust his judgment. I have trusted Kane Veyrath's judgment in every situation I have observed him face, Solace said. He has never given me reason to stop. The Emperor turned away from her. He looked at the holographic screen, at the image of the small blue planet rotating slowly in space, impossibly blue, alive with its billions of unknowing inhabitants. He was quiet for a very long time. Then, convene a full Imperial Security Council session within 48 hours, he said. Prepare a full spectrum options assessment, and bring Admiral Veyrath back to Vaelter Prime. A pause. I want to speak to him myself. Solace dipped her head. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. The Emperor looked at the blue planet one last time. Humans, he said almost to himself. Then something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite uncertainty, but something in between, something private that the mask of imperial authority didn't entirely conceal. Let's go and meet them, he said. The humans had no idea what was coming. They were, as they had been for as long as anyone on Earth could remember, entirely absorbed in the details of their own existence, their politics, their economies, their sports competitions, their art, their science, their constant, vigorous, sometimes maddening disagreements with each other about everything from how to organize a government to what kind of food tasted best. They were not, in short, watching the sky with any particular urgency on the morning that three unfamiliar vessels, significantly larger and more geometrically precise than anything humanity had ever built, settled into a stable orbit above the planet Earth and began broadcasting a signal on every frequency that human technology could detect. The signal was not complex. It was, in fact, a deliberate mirror of the kind of structured mathematical transmission that human scientists had been hoping to receive for decades: prime numbers, geometric ratios, universal physical constants. The kind of signal that any intelligent species would recognize as the unmistakable mark of another intelligent mind. The humans recognized it almost immediately, and then Earth went absolutely insane. Not insane in a bad way. Not insane in a way that involved panic or chaos or mass flight. The humans had been expecting this moment, dreaming about it, arguing about it, writing stories about it, making films about it, debating exactly how they would respond to it for over 100 years. They had scientific programs dedicated to watching for exactly this kind of signal. They had government protocols for exactly this situation. They had been preparing, in their thoroughly human way, for the moment that never came. Until now. The initial human response, observed from orbit by the Sentinel's passive sensors, was approximately 6 minutes of what Kane's cultural analysis team described as collective shock processing, a surge in communications traffic so massive it briefly saturated several of their global data networks, followed by an organized, remarkably swift, and strikingly calm mobilization of their official first contact response protocols. Within 20 minutes of the signal, the humans had convened emergency leadership sessions across their major governmental bodies. Within an hour, they had an official joint response team assembled. Within 3 hours, they had broadcast a return signal, structured, clear, mathematical, correct, and then followed it with a linguistic sequence designed to initiate a translation exchange. They responded in 3 hours, Joran said, watching the data come in with an expression of genuine admiration. The response is grammatically correct, mathematically sound, and includes a phonetic key for translation. 3 hours. They were ready, Chief Wen said. They were ready, Joran confirmed. Kane had anticipated a longer preliminary communication phase, days, possibly weeks, of careful signal exchange before any meaningful linguistic exchange became possible. Standard First Contact Protocol, developed by the Empire over centuries of expansion, assumed a minimum of 14 days for basic communication establishment with most species. With humans, they were having a real conversation in 36 hours. The humans were quick. They were fast learners. The translation team on the narrow path was genuinely struggling to keep up with the rate at which the humans were advancing the linguistic exchange on their end, developing their own rudimentary translation tools in real time, improving them with each exchange, closing the gap between what they could understand and what they could express with a speed that the translation team noted in their official report with a combination of professional admiration and personal disbelief. On the 40th hour, Kane made a decision. He authorized direct voice contact. He sat at the communication station of the Sentinel with Joran beside him running live translation support, opened the channel to the human response team on the planet's surface, and spoke. "This is Admiral Kane Verath," he said. "I represent the Galactic Empire, a civilizational alliance of over 400 star systems. We come with the intention of establishing peaceful communication and, if both parties agree, a formal diplomatic relationship between our peoples. I am requesting to speak directly with whoever represents your civilization's highest authority." 42 seconds of silence. Then a voice came back. A human voice. Firm, measured, with a slight quality that the translation system identified as controlled nervousness held carefully in check. "Admiral Verath, this is Secretary General Elena Marsh, representing the coordinated response of Earth's governments. We receive your message. We welcome peaceful communication." A brief pause, very brief, barely perceptible, but Kane caught it. "We've been waiting a long time to say that." Kane looked at Joran. Joran raised both eyebrows very slightly, which for Joran was a significant emotional expression. "Secretary General Marsh," Kane said, I appreciate your directness. I will be direct in return. We have much to discuss, and some of what I need to tell you is urgent. With your permission, I would like to request a meeting. A pause. In person, she asked. If you are willing, he said. Another pause, slightly longer. Admiral, Elena Marsh said, I think I can speak for every human being on this planet when I say that yes, we are very willing. The meeting took place 3 days later on neutral ground, a location that the humans proposed and the Imperial team accepted with a simple logic that Kane appreciated. A large, open space in a place called Switzerland, chosen specifically because it was a country that the humans had a long tradition of using for exactly this kind of moment when different parties needed a meeting ground that belonged equally to everyone. Kane came down in a shuttle with a team of 8, Joran for translation support, Chief Wins as his technical specialist, Pira Das as his communications officer, 2 diplomatic aides, and 2 security personnel who he instructed in very clear terms to keep their weapons holstered and their expressions neutral regardless of what happened. The humans had arranged an entire ceremony. There were people everywhere, not just the official response team and government representatives, but observers, officials, media personnel, security teams. The area had been prepared with meticulous care. There were flags, the flags of the humans' various nations, Kane's cultural briefing explained, alongside a single flag that represented their planetary identity, simple and blue like the planet itself. When the shuttle landed and Kane stepped out, tall, uniformed, calm, the gathered crowd of humans did something that surprised him. They were completely silent. Not frightened silent. Not hostile silent. Just still. A collective, breathless, genuine stillness. The kind of silence that happens when a moment is so large, so much more than anything words can adequately hold, that the only honest response is to simply stop and be in it. Kane walked across the open space toward the small group of human officials who stood waiting to receive him. Ahead of them, in the center of the group, was a woman he recognized from the communication sessions, Elena Marsh. She was shorter than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 50s, with dark skin and graying hair and eyes that were alert and steady and very, very direct. They stopped 3 meters apart. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then she extended her right hand forward, palm open, in the human gesture of greeting that his cultural briefing had told him signified peaceful intent and the offer of contact. Kane reached out and took her hand. He shook it, a firm, brief, even pressure, just as the briefing had described. The crowd of humans, every human in that enormous space, released their held breath all at once in a single soft sound, and then began to applaud. It was a sound unlike anything Kane had ever heard. Not the formal, structured acknowledgement sounds of imperial ceremonies. Not the disciplined responses of military parades. Just humans being humans, experiencing a moment they had imagined for generations, feeling it all the way through, and expressing it the only way humans seem to know how to express things. Completely. Without reservation. With everything they had. Kane stood in the middle of that sound, holding Elena Marsh's hand for exactly 2 seconds longer than protocol required, and felt something in his chest that he couldn't quite name and didn't try to. He let go of her hand. Secretary General, he said. Admiral, she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were bright. Welcome to Earth. The formal meeting lasted 6 hours. Kane and Elena Marsh sat across from each other at a long table, surrounded by their respective teams, with translation running both ways in real time. Kane had requested a closed session, no media, no observers, and the human side had agreed, though he suspected it had been a difficult agreement for a civilization whose governments apparently operated on the principle that their people had the right to know what was happening. He was going to make sure they did know. He would not hide what was coming from humanity, but he needed to have the conversation first before it became an event. He started at the beginning. The signal.
The ethon.
The structure in the unknown region. Elena Marsh listened without interrupting, her expression controlled and attentive. The advisors and officials around her were less controlled. He could see the micro-expressions of shock, disbelief, and deep, careful calculation moving across their faces as he spoke. He told them about the thing in deep space. He told them about 40 years. He told them what the Ethon had said about humanity. And then he told them what the Empire was proposing. When he finished, the room was quiet. Elena Marsh sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, looking at the surface. She was still. Thinking. Kane waited. He had learned very quickly that this woman was someone who thought before she spoke, and that the pause before her words was almost always worth waiting for. She looked up. "Let me make sure I understand what you're offering," she said. "You are proposing to share your technology with us. Your faster-than-light propulsion technology, your weapons systems, your medical advances, your energy technology, all of it, or enough of it that we can develop the rest from the foundation you give us. In exchange for our military participation as allies, not subjects, in the defense of the galaxy against a threat that even your empire can't handle alone." "That is the core of it," Kane said. "And the Ethon," she said. "This ancient entity. It specifically told you to come to us." "It did." "Why us?" she said. "Of all the species in your empire, or near it, why humans?" Kane thought about how to answer this. He had thought about it on the journey to Earth. He had discussed it with Joran and Pyrrha and Chief when late at night in the Sentinel's briefing room, trying to find the right words for something that the data described clearly, but that was, in the end, not entirely a question of data. Because, he said slowly, every species in the galaxy, at some point in their development, reached a ceiling, a point at which they optimized their growth, became settled, became comfortable with what they were, the Empire included. We are extraordinarily powerful. We are not, perhaps, as hungry as we once were. He paused. Humans are still hungry. Elena Marsh looked at him steadily. Humans, he continued, in the 12 years since we first detected your world, have launched 47 independent space missions on technology that most of my junior engineers consider antique. You have had catastrophic failures, and you have come back from every single one. You are currently planning to land a crew on your neighboring planet on chemical propulsion rockets that, by our standards, shouldn't be able to get you there safely. He looked at her. You are still trying things you have no guarantee will work. You are still going into situations you have no certainty of surviving. You are still... He stopped for a moment. "The Ethon said something to me," he said, "about your species. They said you were not what you appeared to be. What they meant, I believe, is that what you appear to be, a pre-space primitive civilization, is entirely misleading. Because what you actually are is something the galaxy hasn't seen in a very long time." "What is that?" Elena said. "A species," Kane said, "that has not yet found the limit of what it will attempt." The room was quiet. Elena Marsh unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. "Admiral," she said, "we are going to need to bring this to every government on Earth. We are going to need to have 1,000 conversations and 100 arguments and probably at least one very serious crisis before humanity as a whole is ready to respond to this officially." "I understand," Kane said. "We're going to have people who say no," she continued. "People who are afraid. People who think this is a trick. People who think we're not ready. People who think the right answer is to close the door and pretend this isn't happening." "I expect that," he said.
"We're going to have all of that," she said.
And then, she looked at him directly, and something behind her eyes was very clear and very steady. "Then we're going to say yes." Kane looked at her. "Because that is what humans do," she said simply. "We have all the arguments. We have all the fear. We have all the very good reasons not to, and then we say yes anyway." She extended her hand across the table again. "Tell us what you need us to do," she said. Kane looked at her hand. Then he reached across and took it. "SYMJHY," he said quietly. "From now on, everything changes." "From now on," Elena Marsh agreed. "Everything changes." Earth did not say yes quietly. The weeks that followed the first meeting were, by any measure, the most turbulent in human history. Not in terms of violence, there was no war, no breakdown of order, no collapse of civilization. But in terms of sheer, overwhelming, all-consuming human argument, of the kind that happens when billions of people all have opinions about the same thing at the same time, and the means to express those opinions instantly to anyone anywhere on the planet, it was extraordinary. Every government on Earth convened emergency sessions. Every media outlet on Earth covered nothing else. Every online forum, every community, every family dinner table, every university lecture hall, all of it, all at once, running at full speed on the single greatest question any human generation had ever faced. Are we ready for this? Should we do this? What does it mean to say yes? The arguments were everywhere, and they were passionate, and they were, in many cases, genuinely brilliant. Humans, Kane observed from his position in orbit, watching the communications data flood through the narrow paths analysis systems in real time, were extraordinary arguers. They did not argue the way Imperial Senate debates proceeded, with formal structures and procedural rules, and the ever-present awareness that the Emperor's preference would ultimately determine the outcome. Humans argued with everything, with logic and emotion and personal experience and historical reference and moral philosophy and raw gut instinct and everything in between, all at once, simultaneously, at enormous volume. There were those who said yes immediately and completely, scientists, engineers, military strategists, young people in particular, who had grown up dreaming of exactly this moment, and who received the news of first contact and the offer of partnership with a kind of fierce, uncomplicated joy that required no deliberation whatsoever. There were those who said no, also immediately and completely, people who feared that accepting alien technology would destroy human culture, human identity, human independence. People who argued that becoming part of a galactic conflict was not humanity's problem to solve. People who worried, not without some reasonable basis, that an empire that had spent 3,000 years absorbing and controlling other civilizations might not be offering partnership as freely as it claimed. And there were those, perhaps the most important group, the most thoughtful and careful and genuinely difficult, who said, "We need to think about this very carefully because both yes and no have consequences we can't fully predict, and the decision we make in the next few months will determine not just our future but the future of our children and their children, and everyone who comes after them." Kane respected those people most of all. He said as much in a second formal meeting with Elena Marsh, 3 weeks after the first. "The ones who are asking hard questions," he said, "the ones who are not simply afraid and not simply excited, they're the ones I want designing your military doctrine and your strategic planning. Those are exactly the people you need." Elena nodded. "We call them the ones who read the contract before signing," she said. "That is wise," Kane said. "Usually annoying," she said, with a very small, very dry smile. "But wise." The debate went on for 6 weeks. And then, gradually, something began to happen that Kane's cultural analysis team noted with quiet fascination in their daily reports. The arguments didn't stop. But beneath them, running through all of them, connecting even the most opposed positions, a consensus was forming. Not a loud consensus. Not a unanimous one. Not one that resolved all the disagreements or erased all the fears. But a consensus. A human consensus. Built in the way humans built most of their important things. Not from the top down, not by decree, not by the authority of any single voice, but from the bottom up, from a million individual conversations gradually finding the same shape, the same direction, the same answer emerging slowly from the noise like a face coming into focus in a dark room. Yes, we do this. We go. On the 43rd day after first contact, the United Earth Assembly, an emergency body convened specifically to coordinate the global human response, voted on a formal resolution. The vote was 312 in favor, 47 against, 29 abstentions. The resolution authorized the Secretary-General to formally accept the Empire's offer of partnership and to begin immediate negotiations on the terms of technology transfer, military cooperation, and mutual defense obligations. When the result was announced, the reaction was everything at once: celebration and weeping and fierce continued argument, and the particular human expression of a moment so large that no one emotional response was adequate for it. So all of them happened simultaneously. Kane was informed of the result by Pira Das, who brought the data to his cabin with a professionalism that almost concealed the fact that her eyes were slightly brighter than usual. He sat with the result for a while. Then he opened a channel to the Dominion's Edge, still holding position at the edge of Earth's solar system, still the flagship of the 7th Fleet, and spoke to his senior staff. "Prepare for the next phase," he said. "We have a lot of work to do." The first human to step aboard an Imperial warship was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. She was 38 years old, a materials scientist from a research institution in a place the humans called California, and she had been selected for the initial technology transfer program not because she was famous or politically prominent or militarily significant, but because she was, by the assessment of every scientist and engineer the Imperial team, had consulted on the question of who was ready to absorb advanced physics at the fastest possible rate, simply the sharpest mind humanity currently had working in the relevant field. She came aboard the narrow path, the Signals Intelligence ship, which had the best-equipped science facilities in Kane's small fleet, with 2 colleagues, a laptop computer that she apparently refused to go anywhere without, and a backpack containing items that Joran's cultural briefing identified as protein bars, a spare pair of glasses, and 3 notebooks filled edge to edge with handwritten equations. She walked through the airlock of the narrow path, stopped in the corridor, looked around at the interior of an interstellar spacecraft for the first time in human history, and said, Oh, this is interesting. Not afraid.
Not awestruck.
Not overwhelmed. Interested. The Imperial Science Team assigned to the technology transfer, a group of 8 specialists led by a senior engineer named Commander Veskorin, had been briefed extensively on what to expect from the human team. They had studied the cultural and psychological profiles. They had reviewed the biological data. They had prepared simplified explanatory frameworks for concepts that should, by any reasonable assessment, take a human scientist years to begin approaching. They were entirely unprepared for Sarah Chen. She spent the first 4 hours asking questions. Not simple questions. Not basic questions. Not the questions of someone beginning to absorb unfamiliar fundamentals. Questions that implied she had already, in the time between receiving the briefing materials and boarding the ship, built a working conceptual model of the core physics involved and was now stress-testing the model's edges. Commander Veskorin, who had led technology transfer programs for 3 other species and was widely considered one of the best science educators in the Imperial fleet, found himself, by the end of those first 4 hours, genuinely struggling to keep up with the pace at which Sarah Chen was moving. "She's not waiting for us to teach her," he reported to Kane that evening, in a voice that held equal parts professional admiration and something that might have been mild existential alarm. "She's teaching herself and using us to check her work. Is she getting it right?"
Kane asked.
Vesk paused.
Mostly, he said.
"The errors are getting rarer very quickly." "Good," Kane said. "Sir." Vesk paused again. "She's been here for 4 hours. Caro, from this point on, the program is going to need to be restructured. The pace I planned for is nowhere near fast enough." "Then restructure it," Kane said. "Yes, sir." Another pause. "Admiral, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have never seen anything like this." "I know," Kane said. "That's why we're here." Sarah Chen was not alone for long. The technology transfer program, originally planned as a cautious, graduated process, was restructured twice, then 3 times as the human scientists and engineers who cycled through the program consistently outpaced every timeline that the Imperial team set for them. They were not all like Sarah. The range of human ability, Vesk noted, was wider than anything he had encountered in other species. The gap between the sharpest human minds and the average was larger than in most galactic civilizations. But the average was higher than expected, and the sharp end was something that had no clear parallel in his experience. More humans came. More teams. More scientists. More engineers. Then, as the foundational physics and engineering principles began to filter back to Earth's own institutions, shared, taught, absorbed, built upon, something happened that nobody had entirely predicted, though perhaps they should have. The humans built things. Not slowly. Not tentatively. Not with the careful, incremental caution of a species feeling its way into unfamiliar territory.
Fast.
Aggressively. With a kind of joyful, furious momentum that was almost alarming to watch. Within 8 months of the first technology transfer sessions, a human engineering team had produced the first human-designed faster-than-light propulsion prototype. It was rough. It was inefficient. It was, by Imperial engineering standards, deeply inelegant. But it worked. Commander Veskorin examined the prototype and sent a report to Kane that consisted of exactly 1 sentence. "Sir, I would not have thought this was possible in 8 months." Within 14 months, human shipyards, restructured, expanded, and operating around the clock on a scale that the Empire's own production analysts found difficult to fully comprehend, had produced the first human-built interstellar-capable vessel.
Small. Fast.
Bristling with weapon systems that incorporated Imperial technology in ways that were not entirely conventional but were, the Empire's own weapons specialists admitted, quite creative. The humans called it the Challenger. It was the first ship of what they were calling the Earth Defense Force, a military organization that had not existed 18 months ago, and that was now, by the latest assessment, one of the fastest-growing military forces in the known galaxy. The Empire looked at what humanity had done in 18 months. The Empire was quiet for a while. Then Admiral Marin Solis, standing in the Imperial High Council chamber with the latest assessment data displayed on the holographic screens, said 4 words that had never, in 3,000 years, been said in that room with quite this specific meaning. We may have underestimated them. The Challenger was followed by the Perseverance, the Iron Will, the First Light, the Defiant, and the Long Road. 6 ships in month 15. Then 12 more in month 20. Then 40 in the following 6 months. The humans were not just building ships. They were building an entirely new military civilization from the ground up, and they were doing it with a speed and scale and sheer, overwhelming, inexhaustible energy that the Empire, watching from the front row seat of close partnership, found simultaneously inspiring and slightly daunting. The Earth Defense Force was not organized the way the Imperial military was organized. The Empire's military structure was ancient, hierarchical, and extraordinarily efficient within its own framework, but it was a framework built for a specific kind of warfare against specific kinds of enemies over 3,000 years of relatively consistent strategic context. Humanity had no such framework. No ancient structure to inherit or be constrained by. No 3,000-year tradition of how things were done. They were building doctrine and structure and culture from scratch, and that turned out, infuriatingly, fascinatingly, to be an advantage. They took what worked from the imperial model. They discarded what didn't suit them. They incorporated ideas from their own long and incredibly violent history of conflict with each other. Tactical approaches, strategic philosophies, doctrinal frameworks developed over centuries of fighting the most dangerous opponent any military ever faces, another human military. And they layered onto all of it the new physics, the new technology, the new possibilities that the Imperial Partnership had opened up. The result was something that Imperial military analysts, reviewing the EDF's emerging doctrine, described in their official reports with a single word: unexpected. The humans, it turned out, had very specific ideas about how to fight. They did not fight the way the Empire fought, with overwhelming force, structured in massive coordinated engagements, designed to achieve decisive superiority as quickly as possible and then consolidate control. The Empire fought like an institution, organized, methodical, powerful, reliable. The EDF fought like something else entirely. They were fast. They were flexible. They had a tolerance for tactical ambiguity, for operating in situations of incomplete information, for making decisions under pressure without full certainty of outcome. That was extraordinary. They were comfortable with risk in a way that most Imperial officers found deeply uncomfortable to observe. They adapted mid-engagement with a speed that their own partners sometimes couldn't follow. And they had an absolute refusal to acknowledge a tactical situation as lost that went beyond doctrine, beyond training, beyond any logical calculation of odds. It was, one Imperial liaison officer wrote in a report that circulated widely within Fleet Command, less like a military quality and more like a biological trait. Admiral Marin Solis read that report and circled that line. She had Kane Verath in her office at Fleet Headquarters within 24 hours of reading it. "You saw this coming," she said. It wasn't an accusation. More like a recognition. "The Ethons saw it first," Kane said. "But you understood what it meant." "I understood what the data said," he replied. "I don't think I fully understood what it meant until I watched them build the Challenger." Solis looked at the assessment data on her desk. She was quiet for a moment. "How many ships do they have now?" 63 commissioned, Kane said. 22 more in active construction. 11 in advanced design stages. And he paused. "They've started training." "How's the training going?" "The Imperial officers we assigned as liaisons and trainers have stopped calling it the Human Training Program," Kane said. "They're calling it the Joint Program now because the humans are teaching them almost as much as they're learning." Solis sat back slowly. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. 28 months ago, she said, Earth had 1 space station and some chemical rockets. "Yes, ma'am." "And now?" "Now," Kane said, "they have 63 interstellar warships, 18 months of faster-than-light navigation experience, a doctrine that has already caused our own senior strategists to revise 3 standard Imperial tactical frameworks, and a culture of military service that is producing volunteers, not conscripts, volunteers, faster than they can process them." Solis looked at him. "They're not done," he added. "Not even close." She picked up the assessment report from her desk and looked at it one more time. Caro, she said quietly. From now on. She had picked up the word from a briefing note about the first human imperial meeting, and it had stayed with her. From now on, the Empire is not what it was. No, ma'am, Kane agreed. It's more. Year 3 brought the Joint Defense Command, a formal military partnership structure, the first in imperial history that gave a non-imperial species genuine strategic co-authority, real power over real decisions, not the nominal participation that the Empire occasionally granted to subject species as a political gesture. It was controversial. The Imperial Senate debated it for 45 days. There were traditionalists who argued it was dangerous. There were political factions who argued it was an affront to imperial dignity. There were military conservatives who believed that divided command was inherently inefficient. Emperor Drakenvel III cut the debate short at 45 days by issuing a direct imperial decree. The Joint Defense Command was established. Kane Verath was appointed as its first imperial commander. His co-commander, the human half of the joint leadership structure, was a woman who had emerged over the past 3 years as the EDF's most exceptional operational commander, General Maya Torres. She was 43 years old, compact and dark-eyed, with a voice that was quiet in direct proportion to how serious she was being, and a reputation within the EDF that had been built on a foundation of 2 qualities that the imperial officers who worked with her consistently cited. She never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself, and she was never, in any situation, the first person in the room to give up. She and Kane met formally for the first time in the Joint Defense Command briefing room aboard a newly commissioned shared crew vessel, the Alliance, the first ship in any fleet anywhere to carry both Imperial and human crew members as equal partners. They shook hands. "I've read your file," she said. "I've read yours," he said. "Then we probably both know what we're getting into," she said. "Probably," he agreed. She looked at the holographic display of the unknown region, the threat mapping, the trajectory modeling, the projected arrival timeline, now updated to 33 years rather than 40. 33 years, she said. "We started late." "We started when we could," Kane replied. "We need to start faster," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She looked at the display for another moment, then looked at him. "I have a proposal for the first year of Joint Command operations. It involves a training exercise program that the Imperial staff is going to find uncomfortable." "How uncomfortable?" "The kind where people learn things by having things go wrong in controlled situations and having to figure out how to make them right." Kane considered this. Imperial training doctrine emphasizes success scenarios. "I know," Maya said. "That's why the Imperial staff is going to find it uncomfortable." A pause. "Will you authorize it?" Kane looked at the display, at the threat coming toward them, through the dark. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. And for the first time, a small, brief, very direct smile crossed her face. "Then let's get to work." In Year 4, the intelligence reports from the Deep Space Monitoring Network expanded massively in the past 3 years to cover a much wider section of the unknown region, brought something new. The thing in deep space had changed course. Not by much. Not in a way that altered its eventual destination. It was still coming, still moving steadily in a line that pointed toward the heart of the Galactic Empire. But it had accelerated. Slightly, but measurably. High Admiral Solis received the report on a Tuesday morning and spent 20 minutes with it before contacting Kane. "It knows we're here," she said when he picked up. Kane was quiet for a moment.
"Possibly," he said.
"Or it's responding to something internal. It's hard to say from the data alone." "Either way," Solis said. The window just shortened. The new projected arrival estimate, accounting for the acceleration. 26 years, Kane said. He had run the numbers himself within minutes of seeing the updated report. 26 years, Solis confirmed. Kane looked at the status display in his office. The EDF Force Summary, the Joint Training Program assessments, the production timelines, the research and development projections. He ran the calculations in his head the way he always did, quickly and quietly, cross-referencing variables, looking for the shape of the situation. 26 years was still workable. Barely. If they accelerated everything. If the humans continued at the rate they had been moving. If nothing went wrong. None of those were certainties. "The Senate needs to be briefed," he said. "The Senate is going to panic," Solis said. "The Senate is going to panic regardless," Kane replied. Better they panic now and have 26 years to get past it than panic later with less time.
A brief pause on the line.
You sound remarkably calm, Solace said. I'm not calm, Kane said. I'm focused. There's a difference.
Fair point, she said.
Brief the Senate. I'll handle the Emperor. Yes, ma'am. He closed the channel and immediately opened another, directly to General Maya Torres aboard the Alliance. She picked up on the first signal. I saw it, she said before he could speak. 26 years, he said. I know.
Her voice was steady.
Quiet steady, which was the serious kind. Are you going to tell me we need to slow down and recalibrate? Or are you going to tell me we need to go faster? We need to go faster, he said. Good, she said immediately, because I already have the proposal ready. The proposal that Maya Torres put before the Joint Defense Command, and then before the Imperial High Council and the United Earth Assembly simultaneously, was not subtle. It was enormous. It called for a tripling of EDF ship production, a significant expansion of the Joint Training Program, the deployment of long-range forward monitoring stations throughout the unknown region, pushing observation capability as far into the approaching threat's path as possible, and the establishment of what Maya called the First Response Force, a rapid deployment unit of mixed Imperial and human crew, designed to be the first military force in history built specifically to engage an enemy that nobody had ever encountered before. The cost was staggering. The logistical demands were immense. The Imperial Senate spent 3 weeks arguing about it. The United Earth Assembly spent 2 weeks arguing about it. Both approved it. And Earth went to work. If the pace of the first 3 years had been impressive, the pace of year 4 and 5 was something else entirely. Human production capacity, already expanded far beyond what the original assessments had thought possible, went into a different mode entirely, a mode that human historians and cultural analysts, reviewing the data later, would compare to specific periods in human history when a civilization facing an existential threat had mobilized every resource it had with a totality and a speed that had previously been thought impossible. The humans called it going to war footing. The Empire had never seen a civilization go to war footing quite like this. New shipyards were constructed on Earth and on every human orbital station within months. Then new shipyards on the Moon, Earth's large natural satellite, and on Mars, the neighboring planet they had been planning to visit on chemical rockets when all of this began, and on asteroids and in deep space, in locations chosen for strategic positioning rather than convenience. The EDF fleet, 63 ships strong at the end of year 3, was 240 ships at the end of year 4, then 460 at the end of year 5, then 700. Imperial production analysts reviewed the numbers and flagged them to Solace with a note that said, with the careful, measured language of people who had been trained never to overstate things, "We recommend verifying these figures. They appear to exceed what should be physically possible given known human industrial capacity and available resources." The figures were verified. They were accurate. The Empire, 3,000 years old, ruler of 400 star systems, the greatest military power in the known galaxy, looked at what humanity had built in 5 years starting from chemical rockets and 1 space station. And the Empire, for the first time in its long history, felt something new. Not fear. Not quite. But something adjacent to it. Something that might be called the first preliminary rumble of respect, the deep, reluctant, almost stunned recognition that it was looking at something it genuinely had not expected. Year 6 brought the first joint combat exercise, a full-scale simulation using live ships, live weapons, with impact limiters engaged, and real tactical scenarios developed by both the Imperial and EDF doctrine teams. It was conducted in a remote region of Space 3 systems beyond the Imperial core. Kane commanded the Imperial component. Maya commanded the EDF. They fought each other. For 3 days, in a series of progressively complex tactical scenarios that covered everything from single-ship engagements to full fleet operations, the two forces, both of which Kane led and both of which Maya faced, because the point of the exercise was to learn, not to win, pushed each other as hard as they could. At the end of 3 days, every officer in both forces was exhausted, and the debrief data was 300 pages long. Kane and Maya sat in the Alliance's briefing room, going through the summary together, late at night with cold cups of coffee, Maya had introduced him to coffee in year 2, and he had, after initial deep skepticism, become quietly dependent on it and spoke honestly about what they had learned. Your people are faster, Kane said. Tactically faster. The decision cycle is shorter. Your people are more precise, Maya said. When the plan works, nobody executes it cleaner. When the plan doesn't work, Kane said, your people adjust faster. When your people adjust, they adjust more efficiently, she replied. They looked at each other. We need each other, Kane said. We needed each other from the beginning, Maya said. We just didn't know it. The Empire didn't know it, he corrected. She tilted her head slightly. The humans didn't know the Empire existed, she said. I'd call that roughly even. He almost smiled. She did smile, very briefly, in the focused, economical way that was her version of warmth. 20 years, Kane, she said. Then she corrected herself. 21 now. She looked at the data screens. Is it enough? He thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. Good answer, she said. Let's make it enough anyway. Year 12. The Joint Defense Command now commanded a fleet of over 3,000 ships, a mix of Imperial warships, EDF vessels, and the new generation of joint-built craft that incorporated both species' best thinking into designs that neither could have produced alone. The first response force was 300 ships strong and had been through more live-fire training exercises than any comparable unit in Imperial history. The monitoring network throughout the unknown region was sending back data continuously, building an increasingly detailed picture of the thing coming toward them. And the picture was not encouraging. The Ethon had called it a force, a collective, a thing that moved through space consuming what it found and growing stronger with each consumption. The monitoring data was beginning to confirm that description in ways that gave even the most experienced military analysts in the Joint Defense Command quiet moments in the middle of the night. It did not move like a fleet. A fleet had structure, ships in formation, gaps between vessels, organized movement patterns that reflected hierarchy and doctrine and the physical limitations of individual vessels. This moved like weather, like a storm front, a continuous, solid, advancing presence that filled the space it occupied in a way that made conventional fleet tactics, the maneuvering, the flanking, the targeting of specific vessels and assets, genuinely, deeply problematic to plan around. How do you fight a storm? General Torres had asked in the early days of threat analysis. The question had seemed rhetorical. It turned out not to be. Because humans, it turned out, had been asking that question. How do you fight something vast and powerful and undifferentiated that moves against you for a very long time? Not in space, but on land, in history, in the long and brutal record of human conflict that the cultural analysis teams had been reviewing for 3 years, looking for anything that translated. And they had found something, not a specific tactic, not a doctrine that could be lifted directly from history and applied unchanged, but a principle, a way of thinking about the problem that changed the questions being asked. You didn't fight the whole storm. You found the edges. You found the structure inside the apparent chaos. You found where the storm was weakest, and you hit it there. Not to destroy it, not immediately, not directly, but to understand it, to learn it, to find the internal logic that every apparently chaotic thing actually had, and then to use that logic against it. This had been the thinking behind human military success in their own history, not always, but often enough to be a pattern. Outnumbered forces that had survived not by meeting overwhelming power head-on, but by finding the weak point, the flank, the pressure point, and applying precisely calibrated force exactly there. The threat analysis team, a joint unit of 30 Imperial and human specialists led by Joran Tai and a human physicist named Dr. Marcus Webb, had been working for 6 years on exactly this problem. Finding the edges. Finding the structure inside the storm. In year 12, they found something. Not a weakness, exactly, but a pattern. A behavioral rhythm in the way the thing moved and consumed and grew that, analyzed carefully with 6 years of monitoring data, revealed a structure. It was not random. It was not a storm. It was organized. Deeply, complexly, unfamiliarly organized, in a way that bore almost no resemblance to how any known species organized a military force, but organized nonetheless. And organization meant something critical. It meant there was a decision-making process somewhere inside it. And decisions came from somewhere. And somewhere had coordinates. The briefing that Joran Tai and Marcus Webb delivered to the Joint Defense Command in Year 12 was the most important strategic briefing since the original Ethon contact. They had, over 6 years of analysis, identified what they believed was the organizational core of the approaching force, a region within it that showed different energy signatures from the surrounding mass, different behavioral patterns, different response timing to stimuli in the monitoring data. Not a command ship. Not a headquarters in any conventional sense, but something that functioned in the way a brain functions in a body, not as the most heavily armored part, not as the most visible or powerful part, but as the part that everything else depended on. The part that, if disrupted, would not destroy the whole but would, they believed, based on 6 years of behavioral modeling, cause the whole to lose its coherence. "You're not talking about destroying it," Kane said, when the briefing concluded. "Destroying it isn't possible," Joran said carefully. "Not with anything we currently have. The scale is too large, the distributed nature too complete. Direct destruction would require more than we have," Maya said bluntly. "Much more," Marcus confirmed. "But disruption," Kane said, "is potentially achievable," Joran said. "With a small, fast, extremely precisely targeted strike force. Not thousands of ships. Not a fleet engagement. A surgical insertion into the core region, here," he pointed to the highlighted area on the holographic display. "Timed precisely. Executed precisely. And if it works..." "It buys us time," Maya said. "It doesn't win. It buys time." "Yes," Joran confirmed. "We believe a successful disruption of the core region would cause the force to lose coordinated movement for a period of months. Possibly longer. Long enough to regroup," Kane said. "Reconfigure. Hit it again, smarter, with what we learned from the first engagement." "Yes, sir." The room was quiet. "How small is the strike force?" Maya asked. Joran and Marcus exchanged a look. 12 ships, Marcus said. Another silence. 12 ships, Kane said. "Going into the middle of that," Maya said, gesturing at the massive holographic representation of the approaching force. "Yes," Joran said quietly. "And the probability of those 12 ships making it back," Kane said. Joran was quiet for a moment. "Non-zero," he said carefully. "That's a very careful way of not saying a number," Maya observed. "It is," Joran agreed. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "We believe the mission is viable. We believe it can achieve its objective. The question of crew survival is," he stopped. "It's a genuine question." The room was quiet for a long time. Then General Torres stood up. "I'll lead it," she said. The room erupted. It lasted 30 seconds before Kane's voice cut through it. Not loud, not sharp, just very clearly there, very clearly in charge.
"No," he said.
Maya looked at him.
"We lead it," he said.
"Together." She looked at him for a long moment. "The Joint Defense Command doesn't have field authority," she said. "We're command level. We're also," he said steadily, "the most experienced combat operators in this alliance. And if we're asking 12 crews to go into the middle of that, we're going with them." A pause. "Besides," he said, and something in his voice was different, something quieter, more personal, less imperial admiral and more just human, in the way that word was beginning to mean something new to him. "No plan this important should be executed by someone who doesn't understand why it matters." Maya looked at him. "You understand why it matters," she said. "I've been understanding it more every day," he said. "Since Earth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Then we go together," she said. The 12 ships left Joint Defense Command headquarters in silence. No ceremony. No crowds. The Joint Defense Command staff watched from the observation deck as the vessels, a mix of Imperial and EDF design, chosen for speed and shielding and precision over raw firepower, slipped out of dock and turned toward the unknown region. Kane stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the Alliance, the first shared crew vessel, now the command ship of the most consequential mission either civilization had ever undertaken, and watched the familiar stars of the Imperial core grow distant behind them. Maya stood beside him. They had been working together for 9 years. They did not speak for a long time as the Alliance accelerated. Then Maya said quietly, "Are you scared?" Kane considered the question with the honesty he had learned, somewhere over 9 years, to practice in conversations with this particular human. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Scared means you understand the situation accurately." Are you scared?
Completely, she said.
Happened since I saw the first monitoring data 12 years ago. You didn't show it. That's not the same as not feeling it, she said. SYMJHY, from now on, I decided early on that I couldn't afford to let the fear be the loudest thing in the room. A pause. But it's always there. He nodded slowly. The stars of the unknown region began to appear on the forward viewport. Unfamiliar constellations, dark and vast, the great uncharted territory that had marked the edge of known space on imperial charts with a single word for 3,000 years. Unknown. They were going in. The approach to the core region took 11 days. 11 days of careful navigation through a territory that no military force had ever entered, moving slowly, precisely, following the route that Joran and Marcus had calculated to the millimeter, using the energy patterns of the approaching force itself as cover, hiding in its own electromagnetic shadow. The 12 ships moved in tight formation. The crews were mixed, imperial and human, on every bridge, every station, every critical post. 9 years of joint training had produced something that Kane, reviewing the crew readiness assessments on the second day of the approach, found genuinely moving. Not soldiers from two different civilizations working alongside each other, but a single force with a single culture that had not existed before and would not have existed without everything that had led to this moment. On the 8th day, the monitoring sensors picked up the first clear reading of the core region. It was different inside. The monitoring data from outside had suggested structure. Inside, at close range, with the Alliance's own direct sensors reading the environment, the structure was unmistakable. Complex, vast, unlike anything in the Imperial Technical Catalog or the EDF's databases. But structured, organized, with the specific signature that Joran and Marcus had spent 6 years learning to recognize. There, Maya said quietly, pointing at the sensor display. That's the point.
Kane looked at it.
She was right. The convergence point, the core of the core, the deepest structure, the thing that functioned as the organizational center of everything surrounding them, was directly ahead. 11 minutes, the navigation officer said. All ships, confirm weapons ready, Kane said. Confirmations came in from all 12 ships within 30 seconds. Confirm shielding at maximum, Maya said. Confirmations. Engineering confirms the delivery package is armed and ready. Joran said from the communication station. He had insisted on coming, had argued his way onto the crew list so convincingly that both Kane and Maya had given up arguing against it. Dr. Webb confirms the parameters are locked. The delivery package was not a conventional weapon. It was 6 years of analysis and design and testing compressed into a specific energy disruption device, designed not to destroy, but to disrupt, to interrupt the coherence of the organizational structure for long enough to change the outcome of what was coming. 2 minutes, navigation said. The Alliance moved forward. The space around them was full of the thing, vast, present, overwhelming in its scale. Not hostile, not aware of them as far as they could tell. Simply there, in the way a weather system is simply there, moving, consuming, indifferent to the small warm things inside it. 90 seconds, navigation said. Maya looked at Kane. He looked at her. Whatever happens, she said, this mattered.
Yes, he said.
It did. 60 seconds. All ships, Kane said, and his voice was very calm and very clear on the fleet-wide channel. This is what we came for. Whatever happens on the other side of the next 60 seconds, everything we built, every year of work, every person who chose to be part of this, that doesn't go away. That already happened. The galaxy is already different because of it. A pause. Execute on my mark, Maya said. 30 seconds. Kane looked at the sensor display, at the convergence point ahead, at the thing that had been coming for 60 years, growing, moving, certain of its own unstoppable nature, at the dozen small ships going to meet it. 10 seconds, navigation said. Mark, Maya said. The Alliance surged forward. The delivery package fired. And then, the disruption effect was not visible to the naked eye. It was not dramatic in the way that explosions are dramatic. No fireball, no shockwave, no blinding light.
It was quieter than that.
It was the specific, precise, surgically applied interruption of an organizational process that had been running, uninterrupted, for longer than the Galactic Empire had existed. For 1 second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the sensor arrays lit up across all 12 ships simultaneously. The energy signature of the core region, which had maintained a specific pattern for 6 years of monitoring, stable and consistent and inexorable, changed. The coherence fluctuated, then fluctuated again, then began to break. Not catastrophically, not completely, not permanently, but the rhythm was gone. The organization was disrupted. The signal that had held the vast, distributed force together in its coordinated movement stuttered, and in the stuttering, lost its momentum. "It's working," Joran said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Kane watched the sensor readouts. Maya watched them beside him. The approaching force, the thing that had been moving in a straight, unwavering line toward the heart of the Galactic Empire for 6 decades, was decelerating, not stopping, not retreating, not defeated, but slowing, losing cohesion at the edges, pulling inward toward its own disrupted center, pausing in the deep, geological way that vast things pause, in a way that was entirely unlike anything the monitoring data had ever shown before. "How long?"
Kane asked.
Joran was running the analysis in real time. "The behavioral modeling says 6 months minimum, possibly a year or more. The disruption is deeper than we projected. The delivery package exceeded parameters." 6 months.
A year. Time.
All 12 ships were intact. All 12 ships had made it through. The crews, Imperial and human, every station on every bridge, were at their posts running assessments, doing their jobs, alive. Maya exhaled slowly. It was not a celebratory exhale. It was the exhale of a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time and is finally, carefully, allowing themselves to stop. "We need to go back," Kane said. "We need to report. And then we need to use every minute of the time we just bought." "Yes," Maya said. She looked at the sensor display one more time, at the slowed, disrupted, temporarily halted thing that was still out there, still vast, still coming, still something that the galaxy had never faced before. "This isn't over," she said.
"No," he said.
"Not even close."
"No."
She turned to him. "But we stopped it today." "We slowed it today," he corrected. "Which is what we said we'd do," she said. "Which is what we came here to do." A pause. "We'll stop it next time. Or the time after," he said. "However many times it takes," she said. He looked at her. "However many times it takes," he agreed. He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to Joint Defense Command," he said. "And after that, full fleet broadcast, Imperial and EDF both." "Yes, sir." "Channel open." Kane took a breath. "Joint Defense Command, this is Admiral Kane Veyrath aboard the Alliance. Mission objective achieved. All 12 ships are intact. We are returning to base." He paused. "The disruption was successful. We have bought time. The threat is slowed, not stopped. I want a full analysis team ready to meet us when we dock because we have 6 months, maybe a year, to figure out the next step. And I want everyone, every ship, every crew, every person in this alliance, to understand something when they hear this report." He looked out at the stars ahead. The familiar stars, the known stars, the slowly returning landscape of everything the Empire and Earth and every civilization that called the galaxy home had built over thousands of years of fumbling, fighting, brilliant, struggling, extraordinary existence. "What happened today," he said, "was not a victory. It was a beginning. We came out here with 12 ships. 12. And we did what every model said was statistically improbable. We did it because of 9 years of work by 2 civilizations that decided, together, that the thing in the dark was not going to win. But the thing in the dark is still out there. It is still coming. And what we did today proves something important. It can be disrupted. It has structure. It has logic. And everything that has logic can eventually be understood. And everything that can be understood." He paused. "Can be stopped." He clicked off the fleet broadcast. The Alliance turned toward home. Behind them, in the vast dark of the unknown region, the slowed and disrupted force continued its ancient, patient movement. Quieter now, less coherent, diminished in its certainty. But not gone. Not yet. Back at Joint Defense Command headquarters, the report arrived before the ships did. "Hi, Admiral Marin Solis," read it in her office. The Emperor read it in the Imperial Palace on Vaelther Prime. Secretary General Elena Marsh read it in her office on Earth. 312 senators in the United Earth Assembly read it on their data pads simultaneously, as it was transmitted the moment the channel opened. Every crew member of every ship in the combined fleet read it, or heard it, or was told about it within minutes of its receipt. And across the Galactic Empire, in 400 star systems, on thousands of worlds, in the hearing of billions of beings who had lived their entire lives under the assumption that the Empire was the most powerful thing in the galaxy and nothing could ever seriously threaten it, something shifted. Not panic. Not the relief of a problem solved. Something more complicated. More alive. The specific feeling of a civilization waking up, genuinely waking up, eyes open, clear-headed, to the reality of its own situation for the first time in a long time. They were not the most powerful thing in the galaxy. They were challenged. They were threatened. And they were, for the first time, in the company of a species that had been using chemical rockets for years ago and now had 700 warships, and a doctrine that made imperial military analysts revise their frameworks, not facing that challenge alone. Elena Marsh stood at the window of her office and looked at the night sky. Somewhere up there, 12 ships were coming home. Somewhere much further out, the thing they had slowed was still moving. And somewhere on the bridge of the lead ship coming home, an Imperial Admiral and a human general were probably drinking bad coffee and going through sensor data and planning the next step because that was what they did, because that was what you did when you understood that this was not the end of the story. This was only the beginning. On the bridge of the Alliance, Maya Torres was indeed drinking coffee. She held the cup in both hands and looked at the stars and said nothing for a while. Joran Tai was at his station, already deep in the analysis data, already building the preliminary framework for what came next. He had not slept. He probably wouldn't sleep for a while. He looked happier than he had in 9 years, which was to say, he looked like a person doing exactly what he was meant to do. Kane stood at the viewport. He had not had coffee yet. He was looking at the stars in the way he had looked at them the night before his 3 ships had crossed the edge of Imperial space for the first time and gone toward the signal in the dark. Something had come full circle. Something had also, simultaneously, just begun. He thought about Sela Vorn, the young communications officer on Outpost Corin 7 who had noticed the signal when she could have dismissed it. He wondered if she knew how much had turned on that moment of careful attention, of choosing to look at the thing properly instead of walking past it. He thought about the Ethon, ancient, patient, still out there in their enormous pulsing structure at the edge of map space, watching the way they had always watched, waiting with the deep calm of things that had seen many beginnings. He thought about Earth, about the first time he had looked at it from 800,000 kilometers away, impossibly blue, impossibly alive, impossibly full of loud, brilliant, infuriating, extraordinary people who had been using chemical rockets a moment ago and had just helped stop a 60-year-old galactic threat with 12 ships. He thought about Maya. He thought about what she had said, however many times it takes. "Hey," Maya said from behind him. He turned. She held out a cup of coffee. He took it. She raised her own cup slightly, not a toast exactly, just an acknowledgement. Just 2 people who had done a hard thing together, recognizing the moment. "Ab SYMJHY," she said. "From now on." He raised his cup. "From now on," he said. They drank their coffee. The Alliance traveled home through the stars. And the real army, the full, immense, still growing, still building, still learning, still hungry force of 2 civilizations joined by the most unlikely partnership in galactic history, waited at home, ready, preparing, planning the next step. The Empire had been in shock. They had seen only 3 ships cross the boundary. They had not yet seen what was coming behind them. The real army was still rising. And it was only the beginning. The end.